Hi, philosophers. So for this particular video, I want to address something that came out in a tweet by Senator Lee from Utah this week about democracy, and then connect that with Plato's critique of democracy as well. Now, we're dealing with different kinds of democracy here, but I think some of the underlying philosophical arguments for and against are very similar. So it's something that I want you to think about, right? You could write about it possibly, and you can do a digging deeper extra credit for this if you'd rather do that than, say, one of your quizzes or homeworks, or if you need a bump in your grade. So I want to begin actually by reading just the very beginning, got my little pocket constitution here, of the Constitution of the United States of America. So it says, "We the people." So that very first phrase I think is really crucial. So we need to continue to think about, what does it mean to say we the people, right? How do we continue to embody that very first phrase, right? Everything else that follows from that is also, I think, up for debate, up for interpretation, application by our constitutional scholars. But that very first line, we the people, right? What does that mean? Does that mean a democracy in some form or not? So we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. All right, so that's what it says at the very beginning. So what the senator from Utah tweeted out on Wednesday, I think, was, democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that. So we got praise, right, from some folks and a lot of scorn from others. So we need to kind of parse out what's going on here, what his actual position is, and then critique it, right, on its merits. What are the sort of deeper philosophical things that he is saying there? He goes on to say, we're not a democracy. That doesn't show up in the Constitution. So that part, right, is true, that the actual claim, right, we need to be a democracy, is not sort of in letter, right, in there, if we're looking kind of correspondence theory, right? But thinking, right, in terms of other sort of epistemological approaches to truth, the question of we the people, does that represent a commitment to some form of democracy or not? So his claim is also that democracy is not the objective, right? To sort of have your ideas and possibly even just your whims and your passions represented is not always a good thing for the whole. He says liberty, peace, and prosperity are, okay? And then he goes on to say rank democracy can thwart that. So there's a few things to kind of look at, especially in terms of the fallacy of suppressed evidence. Okay, so the first thing is he sort of opposes democracy and a republic, right? And direct democracy, right? So that would be kind of this rank democracy he's talking about. You might also think of it as kind of a mob mentality, that the founders were actually worried about, right? What happens when the majority, right, controlled by our passions, all vote for something that might not be good for the whole, and might be detrimental to the liberties of the few, right? The problem is, right, that we are actually a democratic republic, right? So you also have a bit of a false dilemma going on there as well. So when he forces us to choose between democracy and republic, that actually ignores the particularity of the American experiment, which is to combine both of those things, right? So the founders did not opt for a pure representative or pure direct democracy, but rather representative democracy. That is also checked by, and this is sort of the republic piece, is checked by things like the Senate, right, which everybody gets 2 senators regardless of your population. It's checked by electoral college and other things as well. So at the local level, we have much closer to direct democracy, where we vote on particular things, particular amendments and things like that. Taxes and whatnot, you vote at that at your local level. But when we get to the federal level, we vote for representatives to make those decisions for us, right? So there's a way in which he's kind of sidestepping and forcing these into two different categories when actually the American experiment is this constant blend of the two, right? And balancing out those two. So there's that piece, right? Now there's the question about how do we continue to protect that notion of we the people, right? To have a voice, the people, that is in some sense one of the liberties, right, that we might be protecting, and also balancing that with protecting the liberties of those who might be in the minority, right, and protecting peace and prosperity. So those are the other things that he was looking at. Something else to note is that the particular phrasing of "we are a republic, not a democracy" really gained a lot of traction around the time of the civil rights movement, right? So you have this sort of movement to get more voices, to have voter enfranchisement as opposed to being disenfranchised as a voter, particularly a black voter. And so around that time, right, you hear this same argument that we are not a democracy but a republic. And so there was this fear, right, that the majority would somehow overtake and not be rational, right? And so that fear of the civil rights movement by those who were starting to see themselves in the minority can really be echoed right now, right? So I think there's always this check that we have, right, against what the majority might want, right? Because that could be very dangerous for the minority. But when those who already have power, right, are kind of claiming that minority and superior status to say, no, we know better than you, then I think we have to go back to, are we really inhabiting, right, and fulfilling that promise of we the people. So we the people, right, will continue to work out in sometimes very messy ways what those promises look like, what peace looks like, what protecting our liberties looked like, what general, right, prosperity and welfare look like. So I want you to kind of chew on a lot of that. And then also if you're taking political science, or you will be taking that, just note that there's a distinction between kind of Athenian sort of ancient democracy, right, which is what a lot of the founders were afraid of, right, and Plato also rejects, and then what we think of as modern democracy, right? So modern democracy is typically just opposed to authoritarianism, right? So where people don't have any voice in who their leaders are, would be authoritarianism in the broadest sense, and then democracy in the broadest sense is where you do have a say in who your leaders are, right? So just kind of note where the senator and others, right, are kind of using that fallacy of suppressed evidence, and possibly even sort of some straw man, right, of democracy as well in their argument. So I want to now kind of move over to Plato's meritocracy, because this is now a much older critique of democracy, right, in its direct form, and an alternative that you might want to think about. Okay, so for Plato, right, there's an outright rejection of democracy, and in some ways similar to what the senator, right, is afraid of, right, that the sort of rigged democracy, what happens when people's passions, when the majority gets to just vote, based on their own whims and not on rational thought. So that's the great fear that Plato had, that you don't have harmony in your polis, in your society, when you do that. And one of the key reasons, right, or one of the most influential reasons for this is what happened to his teacher, Socrates, right? So remember what happened to Socrates when the vote came up, right, within Athens as to what should we do with this troublemaker, Socrates. Well, they voted to kill him, right? So that's, to Plato, that's what democracy leads to, right? They weren't thinking rationally. They were afraid of Socrates and all of his questions. They're afraid of reason in many ways. And so for Plato, democracy, right, and the votes of the majority cannot be trusted for a healthy society. So I want to try to give him his due so that then you can push back and you kind of see my own particular stance on this in some of the past videos. Obviously, this is one of the places I'm willing to tell you I very much disagree with Plato, but I think we have to give him his due so that we understand the strongest argument against, and we can really think about what is our commitment to democracy? What is it we think we're getting when we invest in it? So for Plato, in addition to being upset that democracy and the vote, right, in the hands of the majority can lead to something like the death of his amazing teacher and philosopher Socrates, he also thinks that that citizens need to be put into different categories, classes, based on what he would call meritocracy. And that's not in the way that we use it colloquially now, right? So now people will say, oh, this is a meritocracy. That means you can work really hard and rise up in society. So that's not how he's using it. He's using meritocracy to say we each have particular gifts. We each have particular sort of skills, but also ways in which our souls kind of fit in with the larger harmony of our society. So based on those particular gifts and sort of leanings of our own individual souls, we should be put in different classes, right? And not all these classes are going to have control over the government and over the decisions, right? You're going to participate just in what you are really good at, okay? So these also align with the parts of each of our souls, right? And he thinks that all of our souls need to be in balance and be led by reason. And so society should also be led by the people who are most in line with reason. Okay, so you have the three parts of the soul being reason, passion, and appetite. And so you think of that as your head, your heart, and your stomach, right? And so the head, of course, is at top, and those are going to be the leaders. So those, right, who are most led by reason, we should all be, he thinks, led by reason, right, should control the other two parts of ourselves. But those who are most led by reason, those who are willing to live humble lives, right, lives without much adornment, right, only focused on governing would be our philosopher kings and queens. And he did think women had the capability to be leaders, right, that they had that rational capability. So those who are led by reason are our philosopher kings or queens, and they're the ones, they're not voted, right? It's decided sort of who has those capabilities as their children, and they're raised up to be leaders, right? They are not voted on. And then they make our decisions for us, right? The next group, led by passion, right? And this is the smallest group, the philosopher kings. The next size group would be the warriors and the civil servants. So those people who are led by heart, right? Led by a real commitment, duty, right? So you think of people who go into the military, but it would also be anybody who's a civil servant, right? So those people are really led by a sense of duty, right? That's where we put you, okay? And you serve these philosopher kings or queens in the decisions that they make. You do not decide, right, what needs to be done. You carry it out with a real sense of duty. And again, you see that if you're in a military family, right, that's the sort of logic in the military as well. The final group, if you can see it down here, is led by appetite, and that's the largest group. That's where most of us would be. And those are called the producers or the workers. So those would be people, right, who make things, right, and also like to consume things. These are people who are, they're led by their appetites. So they also, they like nice things. They like to have a lot of stuff. So as opposed to the philosopher kings, the producers, right, they would like to accumulate things. That's how they live happy lives, right? They're fine to give the decisions up to somebody else as long as they can, produce stuff, participate in that way, and then they get to consume what they want and satiate their individual appetites. So if you're in your particular group, right, and everybody's doing their part, then Plato thinks that a polis, right, that is a society, a state, has harmony. Okay, and democracy would disrupt that. You would have people from these other groups, right, following either their passion or particularly dangerous, their appetite, right, for various things, and not listening to reason, right? So that's where he thinks democracy is quite dangerous. So now you need to decide, do you agree or disagree, right, with Plato's critique of democracy, right, in its direct sense, and then does that carry over to a critique of our current democracy, which is representative, right, democratic republic, right? So a little bit different than what Plato is railing against, but some of those underlying concerns are the same. What you can do, right, for this particular one, you could write your essay on it. There's not as much in the actual textbook in terms of an oppositional figure, right, if you wanted to argue against Plato. So you could go and you could find maybe a little bit from Locke, or you could go to an outside source like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy if you want to write your essay on that. But another thing you could do is, in the Digging Deeper, I have an option where you can write a letter either to Plato or to one of your representatives about whether you support our representative democracy or not, and why. So think about that we the people piece, right? What does that mean? Does that mean that other people should decide everything for us and we get no say even who's deciding, right? Is there a danger in that piece, right? Or maybe you agree. Maybe we should be not even a democratic republic, but just a republic. Maybe we should be a meritocracy. So I'm going to leave all of that open to you, but this is a really live question right now. So a lot of people are talking about, are we in this moment in history right now actually fighting for democracy in its very particular form in the American experiment? And remember that we're a very young country, and this is still an ongoing experiment where we're constantly weighing, right, the needs of the many and the whole, right, and the liberties, right, of various groups, right, that might be in the minority depending on the particular issue. And so I think that question it's going to be a live one for some time. So I hope you think about it. I do hope you vote, right, even as you're having these kind of philosophical arguments in your mind. And I hope I see some of you doing the Digging Deeper extra credit for this. All right, thanks.